When I was 80 years old, the Emperor unexpectedly summoned me, requesting my presence for the night. With these old bones of mine, I found myself feeling a bit unequal to the task. The Emperor is quite aged himself. At 77, is he still capable? The palace maids around me were even more nervous than I was, relentlessly scrubbing me in a milk bath. As I bathed, I recalled the days of old, when I was the favored ruler of the 6 palaces. Yet, overnight, the Emperor suddenly grew weary of me. For 50 years, he never once stepped foot in my palace. I had long forgotten the rituals of serving the Emperor. In a flurry, I dug out that faded red dress from the bottom of my chest, gently dusting off the years. So it is true that time can boil away a vibrant red into a dull ochre. Looking at the silver hair and wrinkles in the bronze mirror, I didn't know how much rouge to apply to my face. Just then, the shrill voice of a eunuch announced from outside, "The Emperor has arrived." I didn't expect this old man to be so nimble on his feet. The shock made the rouge box in my hand clatter to the floor. That tall, upright figure approached, enveloped in the familiar scent of agarwood. "It has been a long time." Consort Yun is still as flustered as ever. His voice was much deeper than I remembered. I looked into those eyes that were still so bright, recalling when I first entered the palace. He would look at me with that same smile when I knocked over a teacup. The words rising in my throat turned over and over, eventually settling into a single sentence. "Your Majesty, are you tired from reviewing the memorials today? 50 years have passed, and you still haven't learned to ask about anything important." I stared at the new embroidery on his cuffs, my thoughts drifting back to that morning 50 years ago. My hand, holding the silver needle, guided the gold thread back and forth through the tier, intent only on making the lapel perfect. I never imagined I would leave the needle in the fabric. Who knew that during the morning court, the needle would prick his skin? Ever since then, I lost all his favor. At first, I tried to win him back, kneeling in the snow, hand-copying scriptures in the prayer hall. But in the end, it was no match for the inscrutable heart of an emperor. Later, I learned to live with the loneliness. For these 50 springs and autumns, I have been alone in the Muqiu Palace. I went from a vibrant, beautiful consort to an old woman with hair as white as frost. Strangely enough, though he no longer summoned me, he never stripped me of my title. I suppose it wasn't out of lingering affection. He had simply forgotten me. His sudden arrival tonight left me completely at a loss. Are 2 white-haired elderly people really going to do something here? We lay there like 2 mummies, stiff and flat on our backs. He first hooked his finger into mine, then wrapped his arm around my waist, and finally rested his face against my neck. Soon, the sound of snoring began. I stared at the patterns on the canopy, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. This old man, he flirts with me and then just falls asleep. I suddenly remembered a stormy night decades ago. He held me in his arms just like this, and then stayed awake the entire night. Now, listening to the steady breathing beside me, he suddenly murmured in his sleep, "My wife." My heart trembled. Since the day he ascended the throne, I had never heard that term again. In a trance, I returned to that night of the bumpy bridal sedan chair. The red candles flickered beneath my veil, and the way he called me wife when he lifted it. It turns out neither of us could deceive time. We promised to grow old together back then, and now that we have truly grown old, we almost drifted apart in the long river of time. Looking at him sleeping in his dreams, I remembered how we first met. That was 69 years ago. I was a homeless orphan, and that night I went to the mass grave south of the city under the cover of darkness. At 11 years old, I held a rusty knife and rummaged through the pile of corpses for valuables. Who would have thought that just after I pulled a gold token from a dead child's waist, feeling excited about my good haul tonight, suddenly a cold hand grabbed my ankle. I turned back in terror. The corpse had actually come back to life. I kicked at the boy's corpse. That night, I was chased all over the streets by the corpse, until I was finally cornered in a dead end. Every debt has a debtor. Every wrong has a perpetrator. Go find the one who killed you. Shut up. He pinned me to the ground and searched my entire body, but couldn't find that gold token anywhere. I grabbed his sleeve tightly. "You've touched all over my body. If word gets out, how will I ever marry?" He immediately panicked, his face turning bright red. "If you don't mind, you can follow me from now on. When I grow up, I'll give you a proper title, as a wife or a concubine. As a concubine, you come from humble beginnings. I want to be the primary wife. I will only be a primary wife." Nonsense. With your background, I just shook the gold token hidden in my sleeve. "But if you want this treasure back, I'm afraid you'll have to change your tune." His expression shifted, and finally he nodded reluctantly. The moonlight bore witness to us, and we bowed to heaven and earth under the stars. His name was Chu Cheng, and mine was Su Yun. That night, I brought Chu Cheng back to my home, a straw shack built in the corner of the south wall. The cramped space forced us to lie close together. He suddenly asked, "Do you know what day it is tonight?" "What day?" "Our wedding night." It is the first night a husband and wife sleep together. Then what are we supposed to do? My nanny said. She'd teach me when I'm older. Once I learn what the nanny talked about, I will surely treat you well. Two children with no one to rely on fell asleep in each other's arms just like that. Life flowed on amidst the daily grind. Since we had become a family, life had to go on. Chu Cheng never mentioned the gold token again, only telling me to keep it safe. I had originally wanted to pawn it secretly, but seeing his fierce look, I gave up on the idea. With another mouth to feed, we became even more diligent in our petty thefts. Strange to say, this boy was incredibly skilled. With his help, our busyness flourished. That night, Chu Cheng brought back a night pearl. He held it up happily. This treasure can buy us a house and plenty of food. Husband, you're amazing. Where did you get it? I stole it from the Prime Minister's house. We used the pearl to trade for a thatched cottage and bought tables, chairs, and a bed. Chu Cheng said, we must save the remaining silver to raise our children in the future. Chu Cheng grew up fast. In the blink of an eye, he was a head taller than me. He always loved to hold me. Holding you. Even my dreams taste as sweet as sugar cakes. I curled into the quilt and secretly blushed. My heart, beating at nearly 14, pounded against my eardrums. One night in the middle of the night, I was suddenly awakened by his panicked shouting. Chu Cheng stood by the bed, frozen, holding a blood-stained cloth. My wife. Why is there so much blood on you? I looked down at my soaked blue tunic. Is this retribution for stealing the tribute fruit? Am I going to die? We held each other and wept together. In the end, Chu Cheng was the first to calm down. He carried me on his back and ran to the clinic. After the old doctor examined me, he stroked his beard and pulled Chu Cheng into the inner room. They talked inside for a long time. I curled up on the bench, contemplating my own funeral arrangements, until Chu Cheng carried me back home. The old doctor said, this is a sign that a girl is growing up. From now on, I will protect you even more closely. Lying on his broad back, I suddenly realized that the little boy from back then had grown into a young man capable of weathering any storm. Days flowed by like water. Chu Cheng's voice grew deeper and deeper, and stubble began to sprout on his chin. Once, when I returned from fetching water, I heard the young wives next door whispering, the young man in that house is truly handsome. Ha ha ha. My birthday arrived. Chu Cheng brought back half a caddy of spiced beef and even managed to get a flask of osmanthus wine. In the candlelight, we took sips back and forth, our faces flushed with warmth. My wife, do you know, you are very alluring right now. Ah, you put me down. He leaned into my ear and whispered softly, tonight I shall give you a proper wedding night. The next morning, he shook an oil paper parcel in his hand. Inside were freshly baked juju pastries. I went to line up early this morning to buy them. The best tailor shop in the capital is waiting to take measurements for my bride. Really? Then I want a red dress. At the silk shop, as the crimson cloud satin brushed against my fingertips, I barely dared to breathe. Chu Cheng slapped a heavy silver ingot onto the counter. Use the finest gold thread to embroider lotus flowers. Make it to my wife's measurements. My wife deserves the best things in this world. When I spun around in the courtyard wearing my new red dress, Chu Cheng stared wide-eyed. After a long moment, he murmured, my wife is more beautiful than any flower. Over the years, he often bought old books to read. I asked with a smile, are you planning to take the Imperial exams? He suddenly hugged me tightly. My wife, I swear, I will never let you suffer again. I didn't understand where he got his confidence, nor did I ask. To have lived until today was already a blessing from the heavens. How could I dare to ask for more? Let's stay together forever, okay? Chu Cheng smiled brightly. How long is forever? Give me a number of years. Then, until I'm 80. It is a deal. I will certainly stay by my wife's side until we are both gray-haired. 2 years later, a sudden change shattered our peaceful life. The old emperor passed away. During the period of national mourning, the capital was draped in white banners. Commoners were not allowed to wear bright clothing. I had no choice but to fold my beloved red cloud satin dress and tuck it into the camphor wood chest. Wait until this passes, and you can wear it for me again. For simple folk like us, it made no difference who sat on the throne, but he became increasingly silent, often sitting alone late at night, his brows tightly furrowed. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw him staring blankly out the window, as if he were a different person. What are you thinking about again? My wife, why are you awake? You weren't there. The bed was cold. Then I should move you to a warmer place. Over these years, his chest had grown broader and sturdier. I always loved curling up against his heart like a little kitten. He suddenly spoke up. Is that gold token still around? It is pressed at the bottom of the chest. I wouldn't dare touch it. I wrapped that gold token in 3 layers of soft cloth. The edges have been worn smooth. You're not allowed to run off with it. Run off where? You little wife have already tied me down tight. The next morning, I took out the gold token. Chu Cheng stared at it for a full hour. A few days later, I was busy at the stove when I suddenly heard the thunderous sound of hooves outside. I pushed the door open to look and saw a sea of soldiers had surrounded our thatched cottage completely. Chu Cheng, come out quickly. He came out twisting into his cloth shoes, his hair still a mess. Your humble servant, Sun Yonan, pays respects to His Imperial Highness the Grandson. Welcome back to the palace, Your Imperial Highness. My beggar husband whom I had picked up had suddenly transformed into the Imperial Grandson. I looked at him in utter disbelief. You have worked hard all these years, Prime Minister. Chu Cheng turned to look at me. I grabbed Chu Cheng's sleeve and asked foolishly, are you leaving? Can you not go? You must come with me. I packed my bags sluggishly, my fingertips tracing the cracks on the stove and the marks on the corner of the bed. Those were the marks he made last year when he measured his height. I couldn't bear to leave this little hut filled with memories, but I couldn't bear to leave him even more. In the end, I pulled that red dress from the bottom of the camphor chest and stuffed it into my cloth bundle. The carriage slowly drove into the palace gates. Chu Cheng held my hand the entire time. I looked at the vermilion palace walls, feeling as if in a dream. This place where I would have been chased away just for taking a glance from afar, was now to become my home. The palace candles were always brighter than those in our hut, yet they couldn't warm the empty bedchamber. I spent 4 nights tossing and turning alone, counting the carvings on the window lattice, and touching the red dress in the camphor chest. On the evening of the 5th day, the door was suddenly pushed open. I barely recognized the figure surrounded by the crowd. The yellow silk robe with dragon patterns caught the candlelight, making the majesty in his expression even more imposing, to the point that I forgot how to speak. My wife. Are you still sulking? If you keep ignoring me, I'll have to do what I did back in the alley and cry while hugging your legs. 5 days. 5 whole days. Have you been bewitched by some spirit in the palace? How could I dare? The late emperor's coffin is still in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, and the ministers watch me keep vigil every day. They drag me to the ancestral temple to offer sacrifices and force me to meet with those old men. Every time I close my eyes at night, I see you. I missed you so much. Chu Cheng pulled me to sit on the bed and finally revealed the secret buried for years. It turned out his father was the crown prince, but was framed because the emperor favored consort Zhang. That year, the fire in the eastern palace trapped and burned almost everyone to death. Only he, at 8 years old, escaped through a dog hole and fled the palace hidden in a corpse cart. That gold token was indeed the token of the Imperial Grandson. How did the Prime Minister know you were still alive? That night with the luminous pearl, I actually went to seek the Prime Minister's help. Wasn't I just trying to give you a home? So all these years, he was never truly alone, while I foolishly thought we were all we had. That thatched cottage was never his true destination. After I ascend the throne tomorrow, you will be the Empress. Everything I promised you back in the hut, every single word still stands. And what about the 3,000 beauties in the palace? From beginning to end, there has only ever been you. The heartbeat beneath the dragon robe was steady and strong, just as it had been back in the thatched cottage when the ceremonial music for the coronation echoed through the palace walls the next day. I was staring blankly into the bronze mirror. The husband who once shared a single wheat cake with me was now an emperor worshipped by all the people. Late at night came again. The bright yellow figure finally stepped through the palace gates. The matron beside me hurriedly pulled me down to kneel, but I heard Chu Cheng say urgently, "There is no need. Between us there shall never be any need for formalities. I have ordered the Ministry of Rites to prepare the ceremony for appointing an empress. I will make you my empress then. Will the Prime Minister agree?" He will have no choice but to agree. Could it be that once I become emperor, I must betray my own wife? But these words ultimately came to nothing. At the morning court 3 days later, Prime Minister's son knelt in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, holding the ancestral laws, and forcefully suppressed the matter of the empress appointment. When Chu Cheng returned from court, he was furious. He says your background is too humble, and that you are unworthy of the phoenix throne. I was adding lotus seed soup to his bowl. Your Majesty, please calm your anger. It is not worth getting into a dispute with the Prime Minister over me. Do not call me Your Majesty. He gripped my wrist. In front of me, you will always be Su Yun, my wife. On the afternoon of the 7th day, Prime Minister's son came to visit in person. Your marriage to the emperor lacks the mandate of parents and the rites of the 6 ceremonies. It does not count. At best, you are merely a nameless, low-born concubine. His Majesty is the son of heaven. The throne must be occupied by a lady from a noble family. If you are sensible, you will voluntarily request to be named a noble consort, and from now on keep to your place. I asked in return, are the concubines in the Prime Minister's residence all recorded in the family genealogy? Insolent. How could those lowly things be worthy of that? In that case, I have a proposal. He narrowed his eyes and said, I can persuade the emperor to choose another noble lady as empress, as long as the prime minister agrees to two things for me. Let me leave the palace. Seeing the prime minister's surprise, I added, the emperor is deeply affectionate. If I remain in the palace, it is hard to guarantee I won't repeat the fate of consort Zhang. And the second thing, keep it for now. Rest assured, Prime Minister, it will certainly be something you can afford to give. Ha ha ha. You are a perceptive one. Agreed. How could you agree to the Prime Minister? That phoenix throne was meant to be yours. When we bowed to heaven and earth in the shack, you never said you wanted me to be Empress. I promised to protect you. Now that I can't even give you a title, what kind of man am I? You are my husband. The Prime Minister has the grace of a second father to you. The political situation is unstable right now, and you still need his support. Besides, he can help you ascend to power, and naturally he can also. But I don't want to marry anyone else. I don't want that either. But can we fight against the Prime Minister? My wife. I will never betray you. He finally succumbed to his exhaustion and fell into a deep sleep in my arms. I stroked his hair, understanding that some things, from the moment he stepped into the palace, were already destined. The next day, before dawn, I took the carriage the Prime Minister arranged for me and left the palace. I returned to the thatched cottage. I cleaned the cottage until it was spotless. This was my true home. Who would have thought the courtyard gate would be kicked open that night? Chu Cheng rushed in, drenched in sweat. You don't want me anymore, do you? How could that be? I just couldn't get used to living in the palace. Then I'll move back here to be with you. Don't be ridiculous. You are the emperor now. Chu Cheng suddenly pulled me into a tight embrace. It is fine if you won't be empress. How about being a noble consort instead? I pulled away from his embrace. Chu Cheng, I want you to be a wise ruler. If you miss me, just come here to visit. This will always be our home. That night, we huddled together on the old bed. Chu Cheng slept soundly. When we parted the next morning, he was reluctant to leave. My dear wife, once I'm older and take full control, I'll come to bring you back. From then on, he often snuck out of the palace to meet me. But this sweetness didn't last long. Until that day, when he told me with a gloomy face, the Prime Minister wants me to appoint an Empress, the Sun family's daughter. I had already expected this. The Sun family's daughter. What is she like? Prime Minister Sun's legitimate daughter, Sun Yingling. But I only love you. Why are you laughing? Childhood sweethearts are always better than strangers. Besides, appointing an empress is just a formality. I only recognize you as my wife. We pledged our vows here back then. You are my only wife. Your Majesty, please watch your words. I stopped smiling. You are the son of heaven now, not the Chu Cheng from the straw hut anymore. On the day of the imperial wedding, I suffered from agonizing stomach pains. In the past, at times like this, he would always rub my stomach with his warm palms and hold me to sleep at night with no other desires. But tonight, I curled up on the couch, my tears soaking the pillowcase, until the moon reached its zenith. When the door suddenly clicked open, when Chu Cheng burst in, he took my hand and pressed it against his face. My dear wife, feel this. I didn't touch him. Your Majesty is drunk. The Empress is waiting for you in the palace. Chu Cheng laughed, undid his outer robe, and got into bed, nuzzling his head against my neck, using his warm palms to rub my stomach. I am not the Emperor. I am just your husband. After that night, he truly became a frequent visitor to the straw hut, sometimes bringing 2 sticks of candied hawthorn, sometimes carrying half a roasted chicken, sitting by the stove and chatting about palace affairs, as if we were still those young, impoverished teenage lovers. On my birthday in the 9th month, I specifically stewed an old hen and made all the dishes Chu Cheng loved most. The food went cold. The chicken stewed until it fell apart. By the dead of night, Chu Cheng still hadn't arrived. He didn't come the next day either. It wasn't until the evening of the 15th day that he finally appeared. My dear wife, go ahead. What guilty thing have you done? My dear wife, that day of your birthday, it turned out to be the Empress's birthday too. I wasn't careful and the medicinal wine was swapped. When I woke up, I found that I had with her. So the Empress and I share the same birthday. And even more coincidentally, it is said that she looks 30% like me. So you've been hiding from me for half a month. I was too ashamed to see you. My dear wife, I was strangely calm, because I had already anticipated that something like this would happen sooner or later. I suddenly asked, is the Empress a good person? She smiles a bit like you. Perhaps it is just because I miss you too much. Oh, I recently saw a neighbor who looks a lot like you too. Which neighbor? I'll go chop them down right now. It is the heartless man right in front of me. Chu Cheng took the opportunity to pull me into his arms. Give me a little more time. I will definitely bring you back to the palace. Years flowed by like water. Chu Cheng gradually shed the naivety of his youth. Ever since he began favoring the Empress, the number of women in the harem grew as well. The only thing that remained unchanged was that he always held a complex set of feelings for me. On my 18th birthday, Chu Cheng brought the infant prince to the thatched cottage. Look at this child. His features look so much like yours. He suddenly grabbed my wrist. I've checked the medical records of the Imperial Hospital. You are in good health. Why has there been no news of a child? I pulled my hand back, sprinkling greens into the pot. Perhaps it is not yet our fate. During the grain rain of that year of Chu Cheng's reign, when he kicked open the door of the thatched cottage, the medicinal dregs that slipped from his sleeve spread across the mud floor. The bitter scent of nightshade flowers filled the air. The imperial physician said, "This herb prevents conception." So all these years, you have been hiding this from me, I said in a low voice. The doctor must have given me the wrong prescription. Wait for me here. I'm going to settle this with that quack. He threw away the medicine bowl on my table. The truth was laid bare before us. We were no longer the couple from the thatched hut. 3 mornings later, Chu Cheng led a troop of guards into the small courtyard. Receive the decree. I knelt on the bluestone slabs, listening to the eunuch draw out his tone as he read the decree. By the grace of heaven, the emperor decrees, Commoner Su Yun is hereby named noble consort and granted residence in the Muqiu Palace. So, it is written, I will not go. He grabbed my wrist firmly. Have you considered the consequences of defying an imperial decree? This was the first time he used his status as emperor to pressure me. This commoner accepts the decree with gratitude. As the carriage pulled away, a thunderous crash sounded from behind. I looked out from the carriage window and saw the roof of the thatched cottage being torn off entirely. That little home filled with memories had turned into ruins in an instant. Our home was gone. I became noble consort Yun and moved into the Muqiu Palace. In those early days in the palace, I always made mistakes when paying my respects. Either I would forget to kowtow to the Empress, or I would pick up the jade chopsticks the Emperor had used at a banquet. Empress Sun's maid would always point out my errors at such times. In the palace, rules are more important than heaven itself, but the true rules are hidden in the colors of one's clothing. That double ninth festival, I specifically dug out a red dress to wear, wanting to show Chu Cheng how I looked back then. Just as I reached the gate of the Chengxin Palace, I ran into Empress Sun and her attendants performing their bows. Presumptuous. Who gave you permission to wear true red? Only then did I learn that in the palace this color belongs exclusively to the Empress. Rumors grew wings, and within 3 days they had spread through all 6 palaces. Noble consort Yun wears true red because she intends to usurp the position of Empress. Even in the outer court, some submitted memorials, claiming I was a second consort Zhang, fearing I would bring chaos to the imperial order. Chu Cheng threw the memorial in front of me. These old fools dare to compare you to that poisonous woman. What color you wear should be for you to decide. But a few days later, that great fire in the Eastern Palace finally burned away this confidence. On that night when the flames reached the sky, I saw Chu Cheng kneeling before the ruins. Prime Minister Sun kneels at the palace gate with all the civil and military officials. White mourning banners snap in the wind. It looks exactly like the scene during the national mourning years ago. As I walk over with an umbrella, frost has already gathered on his temples. What they fear isn't the red dress, but the shadow left behind by consort Zhang all those years ago. He grabs the hand I'm using to hold the umbrella. But you are not her. That year at the mass grave, you were the one who dragged me out from the pile of corpses. That night, he held me tightly. Wait a little longer. Wait until I have absolute power. The next morning, Chu Cheng insists on wearing that garment with the torn lapel. He asks me to mend it for him. As I hold the needle and thread, he suddenly presses down on my hand, so slowly. Let me get a good look at you. I catch a glimpse of the boy in the thatched hut. Back then, he would always intentionally fray his sleeves, just so I would look at him a little longer while I mended them. But this time, I actually forgot to remove the needle. The silver needle left on the dragon robe pricked him. Empress Sun seizes the chance to punish me by making me kneel in the snow and copy the admonitions for women. By the third copy, my fingertips are frozen purple. A young eunuch secretly slips me a note. On it is Chu Cheng's scrawled handwriting. The snow is cold. Don't push yourself. Go back. It breaks my heart. I've got your back. I crumple the frozen rice paper into a ball and tuck it into my sleeve. He has me in his heart. That is enough. But the real struggle is hidden in our bloodlines. That day, while dancing in the snow, I specifically changed into that red cloud satin dress. The palace servants whisper among themselves. Consort Yun has lost her mind. Empress son hears the news and rushes over. Seeing me in true red once again, she scolds me sharply. You wicked woman, how dare you wear true red again? Is the lesson from last time not enough? I lean close to her ear and whisper that long-buried name. Sister Su Yun. It has been so many years. Have you truly forgotten your younger sister? The moment her pupils constrict. I know. I've won the gamble. How do you know? Who are you? The elder sister who shared my milk name before I was 8 could not escape the entanglement of fate, after all. The fire at the Eastern Palace that night. You were the ones who set it, weren't you? When Sun Yonan steps through the door, I am using a silver hairpin to trim the candle wick. Father, do you still remember concubine Shui? She always loved to tuck a sprig of wild plum behind her ear. The jade pendant in her hand falls to the floor with a clatter. You are. I am that daughter of a concubine you locked in the woodshed, watching my own mother burn to charcoal. I walk over with a smile, secretly grabbing her sash and tying it into a dead knot with the ribbons of my red dress. That year you offered my mother to a guest. She resisted to the death, so you personally set her skirt on fire, didn't you? You're still alive. Do you remember the deal I made with you that year? I would give up the position of Empress, but you had to promise me 2 things. You have already done the first thing. Now I want your life. The moment the candle stand falls, the flames snake up the beams like serpents. Sun Yonan's screams, mixed with the sound of bursting wood, sound exactly like the screams from the woodshed all those years ago. Mother must have been in this much pain back then, right? As the raging fire licks my skin, it doesn't actually feel painful. I dazedly see my 8-year-old self crawling out of the dog hole in the woodshed, holding half a wheat cake my mother had hidden. When Sun Yonan came to the thatched hut to pick up Chu Cheng, I recognized him at a glance. He hadn't changed much, just grown a bit older, but I had changed completely, and he didn't recognize me. Chu Cheng said the medicine I was taking was to prevent pregnancy. I immediately guessed it was Sun Yaonan's doing. He was afraid that if I bore a child, I would be tied to the emperor, so he secretly swapped my fertility tonic for contraceptives. I endured and endured, all just to wait for Chu Cheng to grow up. Sun Yonan took my mother from me, and then he took my husband. I had to have my revenge. Chu Cheng, don't blame me. You said you would protect me until I was 80, but the Deep Palace cannot hold 2 Suyuns, and it certainly cannot tolerate a concubine's daughter taking revenge on her own father. I used my own way to clear away the last obstacle for you. Waking from a dream, 50 years have passed. I am now an 80-year-old noble consort. I float near the rafters, watching 77-year-old Jun Chu on the bed, clutching that red cloud satin dress, tears streaming down his temples. This is not the original one. That one turned to ash with me long ago. He had this dress specially made later, and it has hung in Muqiu Palace for 50 long years. Why did you leave me alone to guard this empty hall? Today is your 80th birthday, so I have come. I want to wipe the tears from Chu Cheng's cheeks, but my fingertips pass right through his sleeve. It has been 50 years. My spirit grows fainter and fainter. Even a simple touch has become a luxury. Do you know why I haven't come for 50 years? I was afraid that once I stepped inside, I wouldn't be able to keep up this imperial facade. You took away the only part of me that was truly real. For the rest of my days, I was nothing but a puppet in dragon robes. I cursed you for 50 years. I resented you for 50 years. Yet when I close my eyes, I still want you to kick me again. To hear you call me a stinky man. To hear you call me husband one more time. I miss you so much. I truly do. As the morning light fully breaks, I suddenly feel my soul grow lighter. Those obsessions that clung to me for 50 years melt away like ice and snow. So I wasn't waiting for him to scold me after all. But for this, I miss you that came half a century late. The last thing I see is him pressing his face against the dress, closing his eyes in peace.